THG Star Dragon Publishing presents Pearls of Sea and Stone, Book of Seals, a Selkies Skins story. Written by Teresa Garcia. Narrated by Illya Leonov. Part 1. Castle Carrick, October 14, Year 2. Kirsty curled up in the library's corner wall seat near the sconces. She could have chosen one of the tables with the more modern lights, but something about the book made it seem more fitting to read it where she was. Carefully she ran a pale hand over the tooled and furred cover, a strange mix of leather and a harbor sealskin. The book was closed by a simple catch and flap. Whoever had constructed this book, they put more than a little of their soul into it. Even after how many centuries it had seen, it seemed to wait and radiate an almost familiar warmth. She ran her fingers reverently over the fur again. Something about it made it impossible for her to keep from fondling it. Like a pup pulling at its mother, I hope that I can leave behind something beautiful and helpful as this, she thought, with an upward twitch of her lips. I wish I could safely stroke David's fur like this. Maybe it would help him. And it was so beautiful, what I remember of it. Kirsty looked at the spine again and its oddly spindly, ornate lettering. Somehow she knew this hand, but had no idea how she knew. The man or woman, most likely a man, since it was almost always the ones the men wrote that survived, would be long dead and gone. The dream had led her to the precise spot where it waited on the shelf, though, unread for likely more than a few generations by how thick the dust had been on the top. She glanced again at the boy, occupying the other end of the wall seat, propped in a contrived corner, with their feet touching companionably, and cushions shoved to their most helpful spots. The torchlight somehow made his sandy hair look paler, though she was not sure how. She would have expected more of an orange hue by that sort of light, not the snow-moon pale, as she invariably saw it in scrying class. A slightly wider smile threatened to break out when she caught sight of the book title he was preparing to pore over. She didn't think that he would have too many more books on potions to read in the coming years before he'd have to move to other reading fodder. And Castle Carrick had a very impressive array. If raiding the library were his reason for coming to this school instead of Schneingert, he needed to hide it a little better. She doubted that anyone else noticed. All they were likely to see was a very driven lad hunched over a book and taking notes. With drive like this, he could go far. She wanted to see that happen for him, and she knew what it was that he was after. Kirsty felt an odd tremble in her chest that then spilled like warm caramel from a fresh taddy wafer. Her lips twitched upwards secretly, and her upper lip tingled slightly, as if ghostly whiskers wanted to twitch. There were rumors about a secret stash that his house's founder had hidden away. That wasn't what he was looking for, but if he didn't find what he needed to spark what he had to do, maybe there would be something in those. If she could find it for him, then maybe he would show her the kind of attention that she was hoping for, and too shy to ask about. Kirsty was running out of ways to show that she liked him in that way, without making a fool of herself and outright stating that she more than liked him. She was pretty certain that the kiss on his lips after he'd saved her last month from the pure-blood-crazed bull Selkie in the lock had gone clear over his head. There is time yet. Maybe that's common in Germany, or whichever of those snowy countries he's from. Save a life, get a kiss. I don't even know if I'll survive my quest in the next few years. Blue eyes peered at her questioningly over his book. She blushed. They only looked more confused. She blushed deeper and looked down at her book hastily. "I thought there was a book you'd wanted to find and study." David kept his voice quiet, and the book held high, but the tops of his cheeks were just a touch pinker than usual. "There's not something on my face, is there?" "No, David, just got lost in thought." Her tongue felt thick in her mouth as she tried to form the words, and she fervently prayed she'd been understandable and didn't look like an arse. If only her practices with trying to shape-shift into something land-based that wouldn't smell of human had not also further increased her already keen sense of smell. He was distracting when he did that. What was that scent, anyway? One brow rose and the other dropped as he regarded her. Then he shrugged. He returned his eyes to the book and finished turning to the place he'd last left off at. "All right, then." She suppressed a shiver at what his accent did to the words, mentally slapped herself, and bit her lip while opening the catch. "How does it do that to me? I may be shy, but certain I never was tongue-tied before meeting him." Twirling her finger in her dark hair where it escaped her braid, she began to read. Pearls of Sea and Stone, a collection of mer-myths, collected and penned by Father Liam Ronan, Our Lady of the Sea Abbey, 300 A.D. Kirsty scratched the back of her earlobe and pulled at it lightly. "Liam, protector, Roman seal. Coincidence? Surely that is simply too much." She closed the book partially, eyeing the furred parts more closely. Yes, this did have the same sort of hair that was on her mother's sealskin, which she had so often been swaddled in as a pup. Child. "So, where was this abbey? I'll have to hit the maps later and see if there's any luck. Could be a secret one of Mara's, but just as easily might have been another of Mary's. I wonder what Mary's like. Maybe I'll ask Allie later what's in that book of hers about Mary and all those others." Kirsty reopened the book to continue reading. Father Liam Ronan. I wonder, selkie or just sympathizer? They often did change their names when joining a brotherhood. Or maybe this wasn't willingly given. Introductory. In our time, there are those that doubt the sea truly does harbor living, cognizant creatures, and is instead populated by low beasts. I personally have seen many an odd thing, and the Holy Spirit hast granted me visions of yet more. Indeed, I and others could easily be classed amongst those oddities and miracles. How wide and wondrous our world, and how small the minds of men. I gather these stories now, while there is yet time, to ensure that they remain for the progeny of man, that they shall remember, perchance, to learn. There may come those that deem these stories heresy against the Father, and to those I beg, should they find this, do not cast this into flame, as the Holy Spirit has shown me that the works and persons of many will one day be. Nay, read these things, and remember what was, what will be. Broaden thy mind, lest one day thou shalt be judged as lacking. Still, in preparation, as these granted visions always must be prepared for, in addition to the copy pen for my Abbey's records, and help to those under our care by proximity, there shall be other copies, down to sharing the same skin, which shall be sent to safe locations which have asked for them for future students needing ministry and care. I wonder why the same skin? His skin? It would be a good way to hide it if one wanted to pass it on, but in a way never to be used for the same purpose. or even hide what is innocent but reviled. But if that's the case, what was happening that would make it necessary to disperse one's skin that way? Unthinkable, isn't it? Kirsty shivered to her toes as she continued reading. Without her knowledge, her companion flicked eyes toward her. What he could see of her eyes had gone gray and distant, and her thoughts, whatever they were about, paled her skin. A slight frown marred her face as the book dropped a little, and he almost thought to ask what was the matter. As her eyes began moving over the page, her visage smoothed again. He'd missed his chance. He turned his eyes to his own book. Would she have even told him what was so troubling? Instead, David shifted his foot slightly against hers. He may feel too shy to ask, but he could remind her subtly that he was here if she needed him. Kirsty's foot shifted in response, moving off to the side just slightly, but not avoidantly. The muscles there seemed to relax some. The book went up again. Kirsty blushed at the feeling of David's foot moving. It was a temporary and welcome distraction. But to let him see her blush over such an innocent touch, what if he began to think poorly of her? That from which we camest. In the beginning there was the silence. Long before matter, before life, the first atom, the silence, grew and grew until it deafened itself. At that point the silence became aware. With awareness followed thought. With thought came an explosion. The worlds then formed, spinning out into the great net of the cosmos. Still, there was no physicality, only concept. Still, the silence grew to even more deafening levels. At this point formed what became known as the gods and spirits. Our scholars follow those of the waters and the hunt most closely, a water child. These are our kind's parentage, and they are the eldest, if not among the eldest, for it was the seas that came first in all the known realms. It was the cosmic sea that birthed the land, and it was the space and the silence that birthed the waters. The first sound was a splash, followed by the crash on the first shore. From this sound came the deities of the waters, who dispersed to all the myriad plains. The splash was their first breath. From the awareness came the hunt. On our plane, the first water goddesses were sisters, originally mirrors of each other. At this point they had no expression other than water. She, who became the goddess of the land waters, rose into the air, evaporating from the heat of the new sun, and tossed skyward by the new waves as Mara played. This separation, so an old priest from her undersea temples says, is the first of the separations that left Mara with her bitterness and sorrow, and caused her to be salty. She caused her waves to toss higher, attempting to follow her sister, but she was bound to the sea. For this reason her waves still pound the land for her return. At this time Mara had also unknowingly called upon the powers of the hunt, as she strove to regain contact with her sister. At this time the creatures of the sea were made, born of her and her desire to find out what would make her whole. First, very small, they grew larger as the ages went by. Unknown to her, the huntsman began to have his attention drawn to her search, for he was the one that always would hunt and care for those on both sides. This was the first hunt. In addition to searching herself, she sent her children to test her waters and explore them, lest there be some other land on this round world. Oh yes, our world is a sphere, despite what the land-loving mariners say, where her sister might alight. These children began to turn on each other in hunger as the search spread over the globe, her plankton being food for the algae eaters, and up the line of complexity.
This you will already know well.
No doubt, unless the knowledge of this be lost by the time you read these words. They became more voracious the more she blamed herself for her loss. Meanwhile, during her sister's search, the vapors travelled through the sky, then fell on the myriad types of lands on this now separated but overlapping world. The earth deities had already been hard at work creating seeds from the soil, some modelled on the plants growing in the seas that Mara often threw ashore during the tempests of her worried fits. In this time of newness, even they were capable of bearing injury, albeit differently than we do. In her falling as rain she watered the earth, moved by the unseen order behind all. From the tears of her sorrow over the separation from her sister and the echoes of the sea through her, the final pieces of the land deities needed for their creation was delivered. Green was brought to the land from the air, even as it was being washed up from the seas and Mara's dashings, and this green slowly spread all over the land, and the land rejoiced in its wholeness. It is from the sea that all eventually traces roots, and to the sea it shall one day return. The sister, whose name has been lost to us, longed to be back with her sister. Her waters gathered in pools where mountains trapped her, but she also seeped through the earth to form underground pools and streams. Above ground she made her waters follow the flow of the land, until some of them finally found the seas. By this time the younger sister had changed. She had become pregnant with the fruits of the land, resulting in the freshwater life from algae to fish and the otters. Her waters flowed through the veins of the creatures of the land as they drank them, many of which had crawled since from the sea, as they followed Mara's desire to seek out her sister beyond where she had the power to go herself. Mara's land rovings remained possible only so far as the sea mist rolled or her water was carried. Here, too, both above ground and below, the dance of the hunt found other expressions. The huntsman was very busy indeed, then, in his youth, just as he remains this day and likely always will. By this time animals had come onto the land long ago, and he was particularly close to the bear and the wolf. Along the shores their distant cousins the seals played, but his preference was for the hunt on land. At first Mara was incensed that her younger, soft, innocent sister had somehow become impregnated and given birth to so much without Mara there to protect her. During this fury the seas rose again, to claim much land, long before two-legged walkers came to be. Those lands she claimed, she kept, and the face of the planet was changed forever. When the seas calmed, the land deities resumed their work. Each area was given its own people with their own features. Some gods and goddesses created their newest children of themselves, and some did not. Some intermarried and produced new lines, and these progeny likewise had the gift of speech and thought. It was a time when they communicated freely with gods and animals. Magic was strong, the world rife with it, an integral part of the very base blocks of creation, as it always will be. Mara was pleased to have her sister back, and together they helped feed these strange new beings. They created none of their own together yet, for how would such frail things be able to live within their waters? No, the time was not yet. So they studied and thought, and together blushed when either the lord of the hunt or the moon god passed through their sight. There were others that attracted their interest, but it was these eldest contemporaries that had the most fascination for them, with how they had felt their influences from the beginning. At last, the sisters had a general idea of the forms that they would try for the next generation that they contemplated. They had an idea of how best to bring it about from studying the others. Yet there was an element missing. They needed something from one final element. They tried some offspring with the help of a fire element goddess, Bridget, but those did not turn out as planned. They enticed deities of the forest, every sort of god or goddess that they could think of, asking them to lend of themselves for this experiment of magic. Some accepted, some refused. Still, though the children came closer, there was something lacking. They loved these, and gave them each a place in the world, and yet their loneliness and lack still continued. Still they hunted for something they were not quite sure of. Unconcerned, the lord of the hunt continued on with his own work. It had expanded much since the time that these new beings had begun to be created. Those beings that were gifted with the shape-shifting powers of the deities and spirits were hunted by humans out of fear and envy. Some did not do so well. It was the strong that survived. He was there for the tests, worthy of his presence. Kirsty looked up at David, pondering and stroking the fur of the book. His eyes pored over his page, devouring each letter with the hunger of a winter-starved wolf. Vaguely she wondered what it was that he was hunting across the page, but was too comfortable to move and look, and he was too consumed for her to bother him. She smiled a bit as he unconsciously brushed a bit of hair back out of his eye. Then she quietly pulled a notebook out of her bag, along with a white and black ballpoint pen. Quills and parchment were nice for writing spells and reports on, but for just notes, no, for those, notebook and ballpoint, just like her dye when he was where Cowans were likely to see, were much more fitting. It also reduced ink accidents. Miss Hortense would certainly never forgive her if she got ink spots all over such a lovely book. The spindly gray lady would most likely chase her right out of the library, and Kirsty would have to seek out the silent lady for the remotest whit of safety. Creation of the priestly selkie. There is a book in the greatest of Mara's undersea temples, which shifts as the cities gain or lose favor, or as she willeth it, that tells of the creation of the last experiments of those deities themselves. By the time the other mer-people had been created, the Merows and those shark people, for each type of undersea animal there was a person for them to shepherd them. Even the seals had these, and the whales. But there was a drawback. Each of these undersea peoples combined what they considered the best of the animals and the best they had discerned of land-based people. Some could even live and walk upon the lands for a time. However, there was no one race that combined all the myriad bloodlines they had formed to people their waters. They debated long. Mara proposed her beloved sharks, or perhaps the narwhals, which she and the moon deity had created and claimed as their mutual offspring. The lady proposed the otters, who could go between the waters, or perhaps the wise salmon. The sharks would draw too much fear from land-dwellers. The narwhals were too much like their land cousins, and would be too difficult to have reproduce. The otter was too playful. The salmon lived too short a life. It is not recorded, nor will Our Lady of the Sea ever likely tell, how the Lord of the Hunt was involved. Yet it was his idea for the pair to use the seal. The seal was a hunter, and fluid by nature. It was also prey, and thus would be able to hold both points of view to maintain balance. It could swim the salty seas and the rivers, and could even live comfortably in the underground lakes and seas the three knew of. Just as important, the seal could also dwell on land for a time, though always having to return to the water for sustenance. Perhaps he hoped that this would assuage some of Mara's ravenousness, which had begun to impinge in the Arctic hunts. It would only be a matter of time before her hunt began to interfere more with his own. A mortal such as myself can never claim to know the mind of any immortal, especially ones so old. Be wary of any that tells you otherwise. The goddesses loved the lord of the hunt much for his help. It is not told how they repaid him, but the Selkies are just as much his as their own. These two crave touch and companionship, and are female to his male, and already had been able to offer much of themselves, so who can tell how much more they might have been able? There must be some reason that the Selkie folk are such a tactile and loving race when not gripped by war. There were by then already several types of Selkie, or silkie by this time. Some were shape-shifting, some were not. Those who could change were able to remove their outer skin, though they always retained at least one feature that would mark them somehow. This tale is not concerned with those other lines directly, albeit they do have their import. Listen now to the song that now and then was sung in the cave hard by the sea, where the fresh water pours forth into the sea. Even now the sea-maids swim ashore to sing this tune beneath the moon, or trek to the inland springs, though the inland treks hath begun to wane long ago, with how man's hunt of them progresseth. By the starlit night and lunar rays, through the dawning and the haze, in the borderland of the three, the keeper's chosen came to be. First by blood and then by tear, sailing life did swift appear. Within the basin of the mare, then with bone of crystal to inlay a piece of each creation within the sea, imbued they then by 3 times 3, that breath of life might always blow, no matter the form that keepers borrow. Sang they long through moonlit nights, embedding water from depths to heights. Inside the keepers of their sundered altars, gifting with sharpest fang and softest furs. This is where the Mara line did begin, from whence the river May did swim, which holds the soft and holds the rough, and pulls the pup by yonder scruff. Arise, ye waters, by crystal blood and tear, reset, reborn, thou must surely be. calleth this the Song of the Water-keepers. Kirsty stopped reading and pondered, jotting down notes on what she'd read, and the whole song-poem. If she could just find the tune, then maybe she could puzzle out some of the things it hinted at. Perhaps she might even find the whole song, as there was just something broken. Yes, broken, left out. Those were the correct words. She wrote those impressions out as well. Why the rhythm change? It just clangs. Kirsty snorted and tapped the butt of her pen on her notebook softly, rereading the poem to pick out the beat again, hoping for a clue. David lifted his eyes from his own book again to watch, as her nose twitched and her teeth bared slightly. He was certain she didn't even know she did that, or that she was mouthing whatever it was she was reading. Try as he could, he did not understand the strange letters on the cover. Was that what the Selkies wrote in, perhaps? She gave up after what must have been several passes, her face smoothing out and her pen stilling the further she dove back into the book. Yes, dove. That seemed fitting. Kirsty felt lulled as the clawed scrawl changed into a more flowing hand. It surely had to be penned by the same writer, but it was as if something had taken over the pen while he had been working on the poem. Vision of Creation. In a twilight cavern the river and the sea meet. Here 2 sisters seat and treat. I watch as one opens a stone chest. There are so many skins in there, some furred, some scaled. Some are scarred, and some are sleek. I do not hear the words, but I see the lips moving as they hold aloft first one and then another. Some they set aside, others they drape near a silver bowl. There are those they cast to a fire. How it burns here in the waters I do not know. Others, alack, they put back. I wonder what it is my ladies do with these skins, these souls. Perhaps they separate out their children for their realms. It may then explain why some bear both scales and fur. Alas, what becomes of those that lay near the bowl? After a certain time, measured carefully by themselves, I perceive that they lay in some of those sacred crystals that they wear. The Lady of the Well grows them within her passages. There is blood. Oh, such blood I have never seen spilled. Deep gashes across the palms that flow as red and blue rivers into the bowl, filling it to overflowing. This river pours out over the gathered skins, and behold, they move and arise, swimming hither and thither, until they can no longer abide, and burst forth from this room in a flash of tail. The ladies are left alone, spent and grasping each other over their bowl. How wondrous! But would it not be easier to give birth by giving birth? Yet they seem as content. And the box, oh, that box! How that box sings to me! The rushing swoosh of sandy tide, and I long to go back into it. Kirsty closed the book and put a hand to her forehead, leaning forward a bit and rubbing firmly. She swallowed down the sudden wave of unknown feelings and stamped down the wrenching in her stomach. Kirsty. David's voice broke into her not thoughts as his arms went around her. What's wrong? She swallowed again and got her arms around him. Her cheek was hot as she pressed it to him, unaware of his blush or his intense stare. I don't feel so well. What did you read to get like this? David kept her in one arm, picking up the book and opening it as if it might attack him too. Kirsty watched him with the book, a strange light coming to her eyes, and her features becoming more drawn. Her muscles tensed a little, as if she might snatch it back. Still, the letters revealed very little to him, though the letters inside at least looked more familiar. "I just finished up the section on the creation story." He thumbed through and frowned. The book continued to hide its secrets. "I think maybe we've had enough of the library. You can see if they'll let you check it out if you really want it, I suppose." David handed the book back once she recovered, and she cradled it to her with the tenderness of a mother holding a babe. "I'd like to if they'll let me. I'm definitely not going to be able to get through this in one sitting." She nodded, while running a finger along the spine. The slight movement was not unnoticed. "It might be wise to show your aunt what you're reading." He shifted, reluctantly letting go of her. He wasn't sure what made him distrust the book. It was only a book, after all, and books rarely did anything unless they were enchanted. Something about the cover, perhaps? "Probably." Kirsty collected her bag and got up. "For grades and such. That's the one bad thing about the independent studies, I think." David nodded and followed her through the stacks of dusty books toward the front and the more commonly read books. No matter where they were in the library, the shelves still towered stories up, past broad shafts of light and dust motes, pretending to be fairy dust. Rickety ladders were once again in need of replacing since they wore out so fast, for reasons they had stopped speculating about. Currently, a student fixture to the library could be seen in a climb, likely not trusting magic to replace whatever book was in her pack. Miss Hortense glowered over pinched glasses at the two habitual breakers of her solitude when they arrived at her desk. Youth was leaving her, allowing her cheeks to begin to droop, and scowl lines raced across her face in time-worn tracks that would become rivers some day. Her peppered hair was drawn into a tight bun above the lace collar hiding her neck from view. Both children knew the rumors that she bore scars there from a vampire attack long ago. Whether there was any truth to those, neither knew, only that she always regarded certain students closer than others, and at times would make people stand before the mirror she kept at her desk. Kirsty very carefully placed her treasure on the desk and opened her eyes wide at the librarian, letting her face soften and schooling herself into the meekest pose. Still, the librarian regarded her fingers, as if checking yet again for larger webs than a normal human. Before looking at her face, Kirsty gazed into the librarian's sea-green eyes and tried to keep her lower lip from displaying the desire she felt for the book. It would be too much. "I'd like to check this out, Miss Hortense. It was looking a little lonely." Kirsty mentally kicked herself for letting the last slip. "I do not know. This book looks very old and brittle to me." Miss Hortense's voice was raspy as sand falling from a raven's beak. The disapproval in her voice made her look even more like one of the oil paintings. "I think it would be better to keep it here." "I'll take very good care of it. I've still got the book restoration kit. Maybe I can do some repairs if I come across anywhere it needs care." Kirsty opened her eyes wider, feeling them become damp, her need for the book consuming her. The librarian considered quietly for a few moments, carefully paging through the book as if it were a living being. "You did a good job the last time you volunteered with giving care in the potions section with Professor Severin." "Very well. I want a report on its state before you do any work on it, though, and then another after." "Yes, ma'am." Kirsty nodded and allowed her eyes to go back to normal, then clutched the book to her chest possessively after the loan was noted. David walked close to her as they passed out the large oak doors and into the stone halls, keeping an eye on her. With her hands so carefully clasping the book, there was no way for him to take her hand, though he would have liked to. Class would be soon, and they would be at potions, so quiet would be called for. And there would be eyes. When the day had passed, and she was ensconced on a cushy chair in the Leomaris common room, away from the ornate fireplace, Kirsty began to read again to the accompaniment of other students' chatter and homework. The First of the Finmin. It was several generations that passed before some began to question the way of life that the ladies set forth for their last children. By then they had multiplied well, and spread through the seas and along the coasts. None had yet left the ladies to follow the ways of other deities, no matter how deeply they respected those ways. The legend told me by a member of the closer of the Temple of the Northern Lights states that it was a selkie from the Nordic region that abandoned first. This clan sought power, uncontent with living to tend to life and harvest the bounty of the sea. They wanted the bounty of the land, but could only remain above a short time, the ability to live without the skin not having been developed by them yet. A deal was struck with a dark being. To this day they say the ladies become ill when speaking of it. In this time there were crystal beads kept in the temples, for the times that priestesses had to be above water for long. This clan raided the local temple and killed the keepers, caring not if they were man, woman, nor babe. It had been the word of the dark being that if they slaughtered the priestly ones, took the beads, and ate their flesh, that it would be one step in a magic that would allow them to live extensively in both worlds. To this day, the defiled temple has not been reclaimed. The next step taken was the slaughter of followers of the moon god that lived on the coast in their territory. These they took during the full of the moon during the lunar dances, to bring the moon's grace and inspiration upon the denizens of the night. These same slaughtered ones were likewise devoured, so as to forge a permanent link with the land. In retribution, the Finmen bear the curse of Mara and the curse of the moon. Vinthrith prevented them from gaining the land permanently, binding them forever to need to return to the seas or risk drying out. He gave them instead madness, thus bringing that to this world for the first time. He took the beads, and with Mara used them to make the Finmen as they are now, misshapen combinations of nightmarish fish of the depths, remnants of fur, the stink of rotting fish and seaweed, vulnerable when fully dry. Long hung the moon at the sea's horizon that night, whilst the sea and moon commiserated with each other, and the sea was red. It is said that night the moon's dust fell heavily over the world, as he sought to contain Mara's rage, outraged himself, but remembering well what other rages had meant for the world. Their souls Mara cast into implements that they must keep with them. Once these are destroyed, the owner's soul is destroyed, and they know true death. None are known to have ever come free of this curse. Only those that have been turned since, and not born among the Finmen, ever seek their freedom. To this day, the Finmen still eat the flesh of man and selkie alike, favoring those closest to Mara or the lady, seeking to reclaim their former state by taking their energy. Or perhaps this is more to cause them emotional harm, and to in fact steal energy for their new deity. To this day they continue to serve the Dark One. Kirsty shook her head. Even in ancient books it seemed as if she could not escape scare tales. This did, however, shed a little more light on the beings that plagued her family ever since she could remember. If the tale posited correctly, then it was small wonder why they had always had to deal with them back home, why her siblings had been so targeted that she had never met any of them. If this tale were also an accurate one, it could even partially explain why so suddenly her family's fortunes had changed, and they started losing ships so long ago to be where they now were. How to find out, though? Mara and the Moon. In the time when the world and deities were young, and only the gods walked upon the earth, while Mara still sought for her sister, the moon was Mara's most constant companion. The moon is neither male nor female, and yet is and is not both. In this time of Mara's loneliness, she opened her arms unto the moon deity often, and they danced upon and below the waves. This was her only solace, other than when she might encounter Hearn at the edge of forest and sea. When the possibility arose, she would climb the sea stacks to watch him hunt, fascinated by his fluid movement, patience, and persistence. At other times the encounter was near enough that they talked, though no one knows of what. The moon deity often saw her longings when making his trek through the night. He often tried to tell his friend of the sea goddess's desires to know more of him, but Hearn kept his distance. He had seen before the rages she would fall into as she danced the brink of madness without her sister. Hearn kept his eyes open for the lady who now has no name during his hunts, and often saw the creatures she had sent on land. The sea always tried to keep what she saw as hers, and though he felt for her pains, it would be hard to be unmoved by her wails. Each time her hopes of her sister's return were dashed. He had no desire to be held down, nor pulled into the sea. In frustration, the moon deity Venthrith took it upon himself, sometimes as a man, and sometimes as a woman, to bring all the comforts he could. There were nights now when the light of the moon did not shine. These were the nights that he spent more time with Mara, and was below the sea, giving his inspirations and sugars to her. When the moon rides full and visible, the Selkies shed their skins and dance on the shores, in return for his care toward the source of their blood. This care toward the sea is why the moon now has phases. This is why the sea unicorns are white. This is why the sea unicorns are so special to Mara. They are the children of Mara and the moon. For this reason they are sacred and escort the lady. It is said that certain ones she will resurrect for their company, and that they converse with her. Some say that it is the moon's belief that if the descent or influences of the Lord of the Hunt and Mara were to mix in just the right way, that it might unlock a way for Mara to go on land without destroying the balance and drown the lands. Until then, the sea unicorns accompany her when the moon must be away. Kirsty paused in her reading and traced her fingers over the fanciful depictions of Mara, the moon, and the sea unicorns. To her they looked like the narwhals. She had seen them herself when younger, and her parents had taken her and Byron with them on one of their sea missions. She remembered being jealous at seeing the Selkies of the Arctic playing so freely with them, and had longed to dive in and join them. There had been something about them that drew her, some burning need to touch the horn and the skin. These in the book were far whiter, though, and looked larger than what she had witnessed. These horns were a silver white, and glowed, while what she had seen were darker. Disagreement between Bridget and the Forest Lord. After the time of the reunion of the goddess of the forge, Bridget, and the local forest lord, an aspect of the deity known as Hearn, both had an interest in one of the families that consorted with the dragons. This was a time when shape was more fluid, and when the different planes were more easily crossed. There were more of those places that exist simultaneously to a place in the same location, but had to be entered through gates. One of the priestesses of the forge had garnered the attention of a lad from a nearby village that had been bitten by the wolfmen during one of the raids. These wolfmen are a different werebeast than the hounds of Herne, whereas the hounds of Herne do still possess some sense, and will do as their lord commands them. The wolfmen retain little sense whether as man or beast. The unfortunate lad received only a bite insufficient to penetrate his leather armor, but enough of the saliva got in through another wound to produce some strange effects. The forest lord had dwelled here long, as the game was plenty and large, and wily enough to give him good chase, and there were beings to benefit from the spoils of his hunt, so that there was no waste. This was also an area where Mara tried her hardest to wash up over the land to walk, and so he had often remained to encourage her not to reclaim this place. Though he chose to remain unfettered, it is said that he did still share company with Mara there at times, when she was in a sane state. The villain of this tale, this truth, set his sights on the fairest and most skilled of Lady Bridget's priestesses, one Maeve. It is said that her hammer was specially blessed, and that she could heal any affliction, and she was one of the best of Bridget's warrior women. It was this combination of healer's magic, warrior skill, and smithery that caused his obsession. This lass was also loved by one of the dragons that once lived in the land shared by Seal Point. This place was accessed from Seal Point via one of the inland cairns, unless one was a spirit or deity. Back then, the priestly village of Sain, within Rien, coexisted with the village that had formed near the Lady of the Water's well on Seal Point. Maeve was taken from her village, and Drake of Rihanna, one of Bridget's favored dragons, won back his promised, but not without laying waste to a village under the protection of the forest lord. This Drake of Rihanna also cursed the line of the lad, in case he had lain with any innkeeper's daughter or barmaid, but had not realized until too late that his promise had been ravished, and conceived during the time of her inability to wake from sleep. The arguments about what was just continued long between Bridget and the forest lord. It is this disagreement that caused Bridget to cease sharing space in the well with the Lady of the Waters, and remove herself, her forge, and her people to Dragon Carrick, and to form her own well, bringing her own lands there as well. The lord of the forest likewise made his visits there less frequent, unable to cope with the sadness that both the lady who now has no name and Mara felt at the abandonment of their friend. Kirsty placed a marker in her book and rubbed her eyes. The names here sounded familiar. She knew of a Dragon Carrick, although she was unsure whether or not it was the same one mentioned. There were red-headed, fire-tempered women there that tended a well. They all had very bad luck in love, as she recalled her mother mentioning once. Mom had even gone so far as to warn her never to fall for any of the O'Drake boys, because they carried the same curse the women did. She had even stated that perhaps it's a good thing you'll be going to Castle Carrick. Meet some nice uncursed lad, so you'll not have to worry about your sons and daughters so much when it's time to pup the next generation for the ladies. Kirsty scoffed a little at the thought of pupping. It wasn't that she didn't want kids at some point in time, but she definitely did not like having her life planned out for her, just because of being one of the ladies' Makays. She briefly wondered how the O'Drakes would have treated her if they knew she wasn't pure human. Then again, who was to say that some lines of the O'Drakes didn't carry a little dragon blood? It took a little time, but eventually the freckled face and auburn hair, along with the buck teeth of the girl she'd played with while little Marcella O'Drake and her mom had been busy talking water tables and other boring adult order topics, came to her mind. Miss O'Drake was a white cloak. Her daughter Jewel so far had no cloak. Jewel and herself had busily played archaeologists and ended up harvesting a few herbs for her potions. Finnegan, a tiny green dragon that liked to pretend he was a belt while watching over the O'Drake kids, had found their antics vastly amusing. With how much dirt and grass stains they had ground into their dresses, neither mother had been very amused, though. Kirsty stifled the urge to rub her bum at that memory. That was all she needed, was for one of the boys to catch her doing that. "Makay, what have you got there? You've got the look." A boy's voice broke into her thoughts, and her eyes came back to the present more fully. Looking toward the voice, she found a brackish-haired boy, somehow both scrawny and clinging to baby fat about his cheeks. Dark brown eyes looked at her with concern. It took 2 heartbeats to remember the name as she came forward in time. "Oh, hi, Nevin." She flashed a smile at him. "Found an old book on selkie tales." "Really? Old might be an understatement. That's some rather crabby writing. How are you going to be able to read it?" He crouched down and took a good look at the pages and cover, blowing a quiet whistle with a smile. "What a find!" Kirsty nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm going to call it a night, though. Night, Nevin." "Night, then. Say hi to McNamara for me." He blushed a bit and fumbled with the pockets of his robe. Kirsty tilted her head a bit and looked him over. "It's not been long since you saw her last, surely, but okay." She stood up, clutching the book tighter this time, and wove her way toward and up the stairs. Her hand touched the wall on the way up, and Nevin frowned as he watched her climb. Something not right about that book. Makay doesn't usually walk like the ground's rolling, he thought. Kirsty fell into the cushy 4-poster bed in the dorm she shared with Allie, a spray of cushions falling onto the floor. "Nevin says hi." She was out before Allie could even react to her entering, and certainly before the message could be relayed. Shaking her red hair, Allie got up, her red nightgown falling around her legs as she padded over to draw up one of the blankets for her roommate. Before turning to go back to her bed, Allie noticed the book that was being cradled and carefully attempted to remove it to the nightstand, only to be thwarted repeatedly. The final time Allie tried, Kirsty actually gave a short, harsh sound, very like a bark. She backed off with a sigh and crawled back into bed. She always makes such weird noises in her sleep. By the starlit night and lunar rays, through the dawning and the haze, in the borderland of the three, the keeper's chosen came to be. First by blood and then by tear, sailing life did swift appear. Within the basin of crystal to inlay. A piece of each creation within the sea, imbued they then by 3 times 3. That breath of life might always blow, no matter the form that keepers borrow. Sang they long through moonlit nights, embedding water from depths to heights. Inside the keepers of their sundered altars, gifting with sharpest fang and softest furs. This is where the Mara line did begin, from whence the river maid did swim, which holds the soft and holds the rough, and pulls the pup by yonder scruff. Arise, ye waters, by crystal blood and tear, reset, reborn, thou must surely be. By the power of the original sea, lest the lives of all that live be shared.